everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made for Stamp and Stencil Savvy for February. This month the prompt is to stamp a journal box, and I will be doing that a little bit later in the video. I'm starting out with a little bit of a different approach because instead of making a regular layout, I'm making a pocket page. I used to make these all the time, and the purpose of them is to store ephemera and anything you want that you don't want to actually put on the scrapbook page itself, but you still want to have included in the scrapbook. So I'll make a page that has a pocket, and then I kind of stick in a few things that I want to make sure get saved. I use 3 different sheets of paper to make my pocket. Now I happen to have a 12 by 18 inch piece of paper, but you really don't need a paper that's that large to make this pocket page, but I happen to have it. So I decided that I would fold the paper so that I would have a section that was 12 inches and another section that was 6 inches. And I folded the 6-inch piece up over the 12-inch piece to kind of make a small pocket in the front of my paper. But then I didn't want the front of the pocket to be white. I wanted it to have a pattern, so I picked out a piece of pattern paper and I folded it at the bottom. I scored it at about 1 3/4 inches up, and then I folded that 1 3/4 inch flap backwards, and you'll see how I assemble all that in a moment. I also cut another pattern paper, the black stripe that measures 4 inches by 12 inches, and I put that at the top of the white paper. Now it's kind of hard to explain what I'm doing now, but you'll see what I'm doing in a moment. I'm using these Creative Memories circle cutters and I'm cutting out some circles. The white circle is just a little bit smaller than the black circle, so the black circle will serve as a mat for the white circle. But I'm only going to use half of it because you could see that I cut a notch using the circle cutters, the same ones, in the top of the pattern paper. And then I'm going to cut this kind of donut shape in half. And this is where I'm going to put the title for my layout. And then I use some Distress ink and Vintage Photo to ink the edges of that off-white paper. And I'm going to attach the off-white paper down to the black one. And then I'm going to attach this half circle around that notch at the top of the page. Later on, I'm going to add some thickers to that to make my title. So now you can see that I already have the black paper attached down to the white paper. I'm putting some adhesive on that bottom flap that I folded on the piece of pattern paper. I'm also putting adhesive on the 6-inch piece of paper that I have folded in front of the white paper. And then I'm just layering those two things together, and that creates a pocket. You really don't have to have a 12 by 18 inch piece of paper. You can take 2 pieces of 12 by 12 inch paper, have one in the back, and then the one in the front has to be folded at the bottom, so there's a flap that you can fold over the one behind it and attach those two things together the same way I did here, and then you'll have a pocket. I just happen to have this longer piece of paper, and I thought that that extra piece of white paper, that 6 by 12 inch piece of paper that I folded forward, would give the whole pocket a little bit more stability. But you really don't have to have that because this is going to go in a page protector anyway. I layered some pieces of pattern paper together. I'm mainly using a die cuts with a view pad called Hittin the Books. I have made so many layouts with this paper pad over the years, and I still have some left, and I still seem to be able to make my school related layouts when I need to with the papers in this pad. And I can't even really call it a pad anymore because there's only a couple of full sheets of paper left and a bunch of scraps, but it does come in handy every now and then when I need to make a layout like this. Now I'm stamping my journaling box. It's not exactly a box, but this is where I'm going to put my journaling. I use some StazOn ink in jet black, and I find that piece of purple foam, even though it's really not pretty at all, it comes in really handy and really helps the stamped image come better than when I just try to stamp it on a hard surface. And this stamp, although it's probably a very old one, it's from Impression Obsession Incorporated. I include 2 photos on this layout. I'm using one that is of a showcase that has a lot of student artwork in it, and the picture in the center is the one that my daughter made. And then the other photo is a list of all the students who made it onto the honor roll for the first quarter of ninth grade, way back in 2015. And I thought it was really important to include that because my younger daughter does not consider herself to be a great student, but I was definitely proud of her, and I wanted to document for her that she did have some academic achievements in her high school years. And these photos aren't the most glamorous ones to scrapbook. And I find that that happens with some of my albums. I'll scrapbook all the really beautiful photos first, and then I leave all of these photos that maybe I'm not as sure how I want to approach making a layout for until the end. So I'm trying to tackle some of these kind of leftover photos that definitely need to be scrapbooked. They're very important, and also they're important to finish up an album and be able to say that that album is complete. That's something that I really like to do. So I have those 3 pieces of pattern paper layered on top of each other. On top of that, I have my 2 photos, and I've matted both of them on some orangey paper. One's a little more orangey, one's a little more yellowish. And then my journaling spot is mounted on a piece of, I guess, kind of bluish or teal paper. I use this little sentiment from the pad. It says, "It's off to school we go." That was just from a cut apart sheet. So I thought that went nicely in the end over the journaling spot. And so I cut that down to size, ink the edges, and then attach that down. I found in my stash a few Studio Calico school-related embellishments. They're like those rubbery embellishments. There are some glasses, which I put up at the top of the cluster, and then there's also a pencil, and I'm going to put that at the bottom of the journaling spot. I removed them temporarily, but I am going to put them back on the layout. And now, once again, I'm using some of the sentiments from the pattern paper as embellishments around the page. I'm going to include 3 of them. I have "The story goes like this." That's in the upper right-hand corner. A is for awesome. I am mounting that on some of that same paper that I used at the top of the pocket. And once again, I'm using the Distress ink in black soot to ink the edges. And then I thought that it was a little unbalanced. I needed something on the left-hand side. So I looked through the cut-apart sheet again, and I found that there was a little sentiment that said, "We've got class." So I did the same thing. I cut it out. I mounted on a piece of that same black paper, and then I again cut it out, and then I placed it down on the layout and attached it down. The edges of the black paper looked more off-white than they did black, so inking the edges really helped them to look a little bit darker and then also more uniform. Now, I never know what liquid adhesive you're supposed to use for these rubber embellishments. I really don't use them too often, and I know that you can really make a mess of your page if you use the wrong one, so I decided, let me just use some ATG adhesive. I think that'll stick them down, and it does seem that that held them down really well. And then I attach down my journaling spot, which slightly overlaps both of the photos, but doesn't cover up anything that's important to see. I wanted to use a little bit more of the teal color on the layout, and I love to use photo corners on my layouts. For this layout, I'm using the EK Success photo corner punch. I usually use the scalloped one, but this one has cleaner lines. I thought that would make sense to use for this school-themed layout. I ink the edges once again with the Distress ink, and then I attach those photo corners down to each of the 8 corners of my 2 photos. Now, as I mentioned, my daughter's name is on this list, but the print is so tiny you can barely see it. So I thought that I would put a little jewel right next to her name just so that she knows where to look if she wants to find her name, just as a little guide. And then I was also thinking I wanted something to draw attention to the picture that Julia made as opposed to all those other pictures on the page. And I was thinking arrows would work. And I remembered that I had an arrow punch. So I used that punch and I cut out some arrows from the same paper that I used to mat the photo on the left. And there were 2 arrows that punched out when you use this punch, so I decided to include 2 arrows. I just include a moment of me writing out my journaling. I write it out in pencil first, and then I'll go over it in marker, and then once the marker is thoroughly dry, I will use an eraser and I erase all of the pencil lines. I just think that's really important, otherwise I know I'll make a mistake. So this is not a necessary step, but I wanted to show you that you could do this if you wanted to. This is going into a page protector, so it won't open up, but in case you wanted to make the page an actual pocket, you can take some long, thin strips of paper, score them down the middle, and then attach one side to the back of the pocket and one side to the front of the pocket, and that will create a side for your pocket in case you want that. Like I said, this doesn't have to be part of your page because you are going to have it tucked into a page protector, but I thought it was worth showing you just in case you're interested. After I thought about it, I cut an angle into the bottom of the strips of paper on both sides, just so the bottom of the pocket wouldn't be too bulky. So now the pocket is finished. I tuck a few pieces of memorabilia into it, and the layout is complete, and here are a few close-ups. This is a little bit different than some of the other pages that I make, but I think it's really important to have opportunities to store memorabilia in your albums, and this helps me to do it. In the description box is a link to the playlist for this hop. You can see all of the Stamp and Stencil Savvy videos by checking out that link. I highly recommend that you check all the videos out. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll see you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.